Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, everyone, for making this conference possible. I'm going to talk about female children in archaic and classical Greece. Specifically, I'll address the ways in which they were trained to control their sexuality from a very early age. Many ancient sources reveal that women in ancient Greece were valued primarily for their roles as wives and mothers. I'll investigate some of the messages imparted to girls to prepare them for this kind of domestic life. As you'll see, these messages were ubiquitous from early education to burial practices, and were used as vehicles through which the values of the oikos and polis were imparted. The hope was that such messages would educate and control girls so that they would reserve the use of their sexuality for marriage and the conception of legitimate children. I'll examine vase paintings, grave goods, toys, and extant poetry from Arena, Telesilla, and Corinna to reveal the training that girls received. I'll also discuss admonitory and Aegean myths within festivals and choral performance, and strong recurring themes of female sexuality, abduction, male violence, and fertility associated with these events. Girls weren't formally educated, however they underwent extensive training to prepare for adult womanhood. Girls married at an early age, so their education had to be brief and condensed, and often came from their mothers. They were in near constant contact with their mothers throughout childhood, locked away from the public eye in the gynecaon, or women's quarters. This Attic black figure plaque from about 550 BCE shows a girl with her mother who appears to be weeping. In the gynecaon, girls learned to manage a household, work with wool, care for siblings, and prepare food. This 5th century Boeotian terracotta figurine shows a woman and child who appear to be cooking together. It's possible that some girls were taught to read, but literary evidence such as an early Hellenistic fragment written by Menander suggests that women were largely discouraged from literacy. Teach a girl letters, and you simply make more venomous the venom of a snake, he writes. He's a little later than most of my other sources, but it's likely that his views were widespread in earlier times, and nobody else I found said it was quite as much goes through. Young girls were given homemade toys that prepared them for later responsibility, such as live animals to care for, or terracotta figurines depicting dogs or roosters. This 5th century Choas depicts a girl chasing a bird, for example. Sheep and oxen figurines served as a reminder of the animals that would be sacrificed in funerary rites or future rites of passage. The care that live animals required and the care symbolized in owning a model animal trained girls to care for the children they're expected to one day have. Girls who had reached a certain level of maturity were given dolls with movable limbs, not only as toys but as training devices. Arena, a poet from Rhodes, often dated to the 6th century BCE and alternately dated to the 4th, gives a brief description of girlhood in Greece. She recalls the dolls that she and a friend played with in this excerpt from her poem, The Distaff. When we were young girls, we sat in our rooms without a care, holding our dolls and pretending we were young brides. This may suggest that the girls were pretending to be young mothers, caring for their babies, but it's also plausible that Arena's dolls represented young brides and were dressed accordingly. Dolls such as this had movable arms and legs. They were, along with other toys, have been found in sanctuaries where they were dedicated to ensure healthy reproduction or a safe entry into adulthood. Dolls without limbs also occur, and some have perforated tops, suggesting that they were hung as offerings or apotropaic devices. These limbless dolls also appear on gravestones such as this, and represent offerings that would have protected them from the risks of reproduction. Regardless of whether dolls trained for motherhood or were intended to represent a girl's status as future bride, they were used to instill messages about the societal expectation to become wife, mother, and caregiver. Outside of the confines of the gynecaon, the training in the oikos, girls participated in festivals and rites of passage as facilitators of cultic worship. Here, girls were introduced to the religious responsibilities of female members of the polis and began actively serving the community. These festivals and rites incorporated the anxiety, fear, relief, and gratitude of both participant and observer. In addition to encouraging reproduction for the sake of the polis, they were performed to ensure the wellness of the community. In addition to religious rites, young or adolescent girls were involved in choral training and performance. The chorus was integrated into festivals, frequently included cult practices, and consecrated a specific deity. This Attic philae might represent a female chorus. Girls' participation in the chorus often signified a transition from one phase of life into another. Since many people believed that transition in girls' lives were dangerous, they paid close attention to junctures between stages and performed rites to ensure safe passage. Choral performance also included learning and teaching myths that encouraged behavior appropriate for young and adolescent girls. The belief in the wildness of girls was central in an education that attempted to tame them. The first festival that I want to discuss is Baronia, beginning with the procession from Athens to Baron. This festival is best known for playing the bear, a ritual wherein girls between the ages of 5 and 10 obtained the protection of Artemis. The rites at Baron, known as Arctea, both prepared girls for marriage and motherhood and provided security to the community. Paintings on crater Iskoi, the characteristic ritual vessel of Arctea, can inform us of the rites that may have occurred. These vessels date to the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, unique in both style and shape, have been found not only at Baron but also at several other sanctuaries of Artemis throughout the Attic region, indicating that Arctea was not exclusive to Baron, and perhaps a more integrated rite that had lasted until the 3rd century. There are several myths associated with Arctea, one of which is reported by Herodotus, who tells of the abduction of women worshipping Artemis at Baron. The telling of myths that involve violence against worshippers of Artemis highlighted the risks that were associated with her veneration, while simultaneously emphasizing the importance of honoring her to ensure safety. This abduction myth may have been instructive to Arctoi or female participants and informed them of the power of their sexuality. The procession of Arctoi from Athens to Baron tested the security of the population as a whole. If the girls moved to this remote location and performed their rites unmolested, they reaffirmed the community's success in maintaining the protection, instruction, and control of women. These processions and festivals express the community's confidence in a secure future with properly married wives and mothers. Pottery can tell us much more about Arctea than literature can. The paintings of these black-figured crateriskoi from Baron give us insight into the rites that may have occurred. Girls stand in line and move toward an altar, as you can see in this fragment. They wear short chitons, and their hair is styled in a way that is commonly seen in photos and paintings of girls of Baron. On this vase, a girl appears to be running naked, which is quite rare for depictions of young girls during this period. You also might notice a torch in her hand, though it's hard to make out. Whether these girls are dancing, running, or processing, they often move toward altars. It's possible that the ritual movement depicted in these paintings refer to the rite known as Arctuine, or playing the bear, which relates to a myth wherein a bear is killed against Artemis's wishes. Arctuine would have exemplified the prevailing belief in the wild nature of young girls, as they atoned for the bear's murder by mimicking the bear. This ritual movement also may indicate that choral training was integrated into Arctea. Both Arctea and the myth to which Herodotus refers transmitted lessons to the girls through ritual, inducted girls in serving the community, and warned them of the perils of inappropriate use of their sexuality. The agrarian thesmophoria held in cities throughout Greece required women participants to inspire fertility that ensured crop growth. From Lucian, we have an inscription, or an indication that both mother and unmarried daughter were present at the thesmophoria, and though it's often understood that the festival was reserved for married women, the myths and rites of the thesmophoria parallel others that were used to instruct girls. As this evidence is not conclusive, it's plausible that young girls may have been exposed to the rites and myths of the festival. As in Baronia, abduction and admonitory myths with themes of male violence and sexual control were used in the thesmophoria. The festival involved a series of rituals. The first was the recovery of pig remains that had previously been thrown into caves or snake pits. This rite is said to have represented Persephone's descent into Hades. Next, they were mixed with seed grain and placed on altars. This is accompanied by a ritualistic fasting and mimicking Demeter's behavior at the loss of her daughter. Finally, the pig remains and seed grain were scattered in fields to facilitate germination. This, of course, represents Persephone's return and her mother's return to fertilization. There is also another layer of meaning associated with this rite. The transformation of wild pig remains into a useful agricultural tool parallels the way in which girls were encouraged to transform from wild sexual beings into morally sound wives. In both cases, you have something that once was wild and uncontrollable, changing into something controllable and beneficial to the polis. This ritual serves two further purposes: to illustrate that men dominated sexual matters through the abduction of Persephone by Hades, and to warn of the emotions that might occur during the impending departure of the girl from the oikos at marriage through the mimicking of Demeter's grief over her daughter's abduction. Poetry reveals additional messages transmitted to young girls, possibly in female choral performance. Both Alcman and Sappho produced works pertaining to the training of young girls and their sexuality, but I was more interested in the lesser-known female poets, who who may have imparted a similar message in choral performance. Fragments attributed to early 5th century Argive poet Telesilla suggest her involvement in the education of girls and are instructive of their ideal behavior. Because her pupils were likely involved in music in a cult context, it's possible that her poems were incorporated into female choral performance or something similar. The first fragment by Telesilla is addressed to maidens and refers to Alphaeus' attempted rape of Artemis. Pausanias elaborates in his description of Greece that Artemis and her nymphs, suspecting Alphaeus' plans, cover themselves in mud so that she would be indistinguishable in the group. This myth may be an Aeacian myth that explains a ritual that may have been performed at the shrine of Artemis Alpheimia. Girls approaching marrying age would have mimicked Artemis' actions to gain her protection upon entering into adulthood. They would have gone to sanctuaries by the river Alphaeus, covered themselves in mud, and washed it away to reveal their new status as girls eligible for marriage with the blessings of Artemis. As girls successfully perform this ritual, they serve the community by obtaining the protection of Artemis against undesired circumstances associated with female sexuality and reproduction. In addition to Telesilla, 6th century Corinna of Boeotia, who is alternately dated to the 5th and 4th centuries, may have provided choral training to girls approaching marriage. One fragment recalls a myth in which Zeus, Poseidon, and Hermes raped the 9 daughters of Asopos. In this myth, Asopos is consoled by a Cryphon and instructed to cease from grief, since he will be the father-in-law of the gods. This myth includes the complex emotions of a parent's loss of their daughter to marriage, and the themes of female sexuality, male violence, and myth are again bound together to educate young women approaching marrying age. The girl's potential status as bride was emphasized in both life and death, and it's revealed in girls' graves. Girls received generous funerary attention that increased with age. This indicates a greater level of communal anxiety that surrounded the proper control of female sexuality and identity. Additionally, an increase in choas appearing in the graves of young girls at the end of the 5th century suggests a concern about population that coincided with the Peloponnesian War. The death of a young girl often brought forth lamentations over her failure to fulfill her intended role as wife and mother. Gender-specific items such as spindle whorls, needles, and dolls have been found in graves of girls, emphasizing domestic roles. This lekithos depicts a young girl approaching a tomb with a doll clasped in both hands. Ritual marriage vases such as lutrophoroi additionally mark the graves of girls who died unmarried. These examples illustrate that a girl's intended role as a woman was inescapable, even in death. In some ways, girls in ancient Greece were robbed of a childhood. Starting in infancy and lasting until marriage, they were taught to behave in ways that would ultimately serve the Oikos and Polis. This underscores the deep distrust and fear of female sexuality that characterized ancient Greek society. Female sexuality was valued primarily for the introduction or regulation of new members of the polis, and the role of a woman in Greek society was taught from the moment a girl was born. Thank you.
Questions? I'm always happy to start. This is nice. I haven't seen some of those images before, so those were great. But not to pick on the tiniest detail of your paper, but the piglets there that they sacrifice,
Yeah.
they're not wild, right? They're just cheap. A, and B, there's the convenient fact that the word piglet is koinos, right? Is the slang for vagina,
Yes, yes.
referring to the ideal, depilated, beautiful vagina, right?
Yeah, thanks so much for elaborating on that, yeah.
So, I
There's
mean,
a lot more there.
I think piglet sacrifice existed outside of Greece in the ancient Mediterranean, but for that particular ritual, it's particularly useful.
Yeah.
Want to talk more about piglets?
I think you said it quite well. I know that votive offerings that looked like pigs were also found. Yes.
Just a quick question, why would they put the pig remains on the altar first? Just, to mix it with grains, right?
Yes.
And then would they burn it there, or would they just?
They dump it in the pit, the megara.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the first thing, right? They dump them in the
Right,
pit,
and then they pull it out,
take them
yeah.
out, they put them on the altar,
And then they scatter them.
and then they scatter them.
Yes.
Why not
Yeah.
scatter them right away?
That's a good question.
There's some kind of contact holiness going on.
Yeah.
Right?
But altars I'm always thinking about altars as barbecues.
What the heck? Like, if they were there for a year, there would just be dirt.
I know, so do you really
I'm
want
almost
to
wondering
put
about.
this oozing,
Yeah.
you know, maggot infested stuff there on an altar and think that it's
Yeah.
not holy?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, it turns it into kind of like compost because they keep it down there so long. So then, like, I don't know if you guys have ever made compost, but when you make compost, you kind of want to mix it with some dirt to, like, get it, like, not slimy and icky so that you can just spread it somewhere. So I think since they did spread it on, like, the grounds, like, you might want to, like, spread it with some of the ash from the altar or something.
So they do, there is archaeological evidence for these megaron, which they've even found at least a few piglet bones now that they've overviewed osteological studies of it. So it does seem like they're really actually doing it. Because as you know, the description of that ritual is like a couple of lines from a post-Christian writer, Christian writer who has his own agenda. So it's not really clear what they're actually doing.
Well, it seems like you've stressed the importance of gaining goddess protection through the proper, rituals that these girls go through. And so I think it's really important to make a big gesture to Demeter. And if you don't present it to her on the altar, then how will she know that you're doing it for her?
Yeah.
And therefore no protection. So that seems, I don't know, that's my opinion.
So I'm sort of liking Hannah's idea that there's ash there too.
Yeah, because it could be an
There's
ash
some
altar.
actual real benefit to it. Not that we can-
Is there any reason that it's Artemis? So the ritual that you had with the mud, I know that came from the story, but it seemed like a lot of the goddess stuff was about Artemis, and she just seems like a very strange goddess to go to when you're talking about marriage.
I think it was to appease her so that she wouldn't be angry and
Kill
inflict
your
some
husband.
kind of wrath. Yeah. Yes.
She's a goddess of childbirth too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who kills you in childbirth.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I was a little confused when you mentioned something about the Peloponnesian War and about an increase in artifacts surrounding that, and I didn't quite catch your point, so if you could just...
Yes. I think the sentiment was that they were wanting to commemorate all of the children lost because they had concerns about population. And so the fact that female children were dying were a concern, which wasn't always the case depending on population and need for, these reproductive vessels called women. So,
Thank you.
yes.
I mean, especially because there was the plague that was just kind of going around everywhere, so
Yes.
everyone would have been dying.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
One more? Just have a quick one about,
Yes.
let's see, fire that appears in the torches and in the, and at one point on the altar.
Yes.
I mean, not to say, not to make the too obvious point that fire is a metaphor for sexuality in almost every culture, but we said that goes along with something that's contained, controlled, put in its proper
Yes.
place.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you.
I guess I'd say, was there a lot? Were there things in your sources, or other than some of the pottery about the use of fire in that ritual, or to create the ash that might?
No, not so much, but that's something that I'm very curious to look into. So, yeah, thank you.
Maybe one more, if I can ask you about the mud bath ritual.
Yes.
How do you interpret that? What was the purpose behind that?
Um,
I mean, are there any other religious ideas that flow into it?
Maybe it's sort of cleansing is the thing that comes to mind. Again, to appease Artemis. Yeah.
So, but why can't they then just go into the river without first covering themselves completely in mud?
It's you make
Is there a
yourself
connection
dirty.
with the
That's the and then you make yourself.
Covering yourself in mud is the liminal stage of the rite of passage.
Yeah.
So it's when they're not in either category.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, but it doesn't fit necessarily, about the Flamen-Dialis in Rome that had to basically execute some kind of holy marriage with his wife, the Flaminica, and their bedposts were covered in mud to create this connection to the ground that they were fertilizing while sleeping with each other.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
So I'm thinking, is there some kind of connection?
Yeah.
Earthifying himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting.
Because the river is the male procreative element, right?
Yes, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.